Great, thanks. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the June 8th UAC meeting. I'm just going to go in the order of the screen and then I will go to the live participants. Commissioner Scharf.
Here.
Vice Chair Johnston.
Here.
Commissioner Bowie.
Here.
Commissioner Metz.
Here.
And Commissioner Forcell.
Here.
And I understand Commissioner Smith is not able to join us tonight. Great. And with that, I do not believe we have any agenda revisions or review from before, so we will turn to oral communications. Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak on an item that is not on the agenda?
Chair, there are no hands raised in Zoom.
Thank you. And there's no one present, I take it.
We do have someone present, but he's not raising his hand.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I should have been more clear. Okay, so we will turn to the minutes. Does anyone have any revisions to the minutes? Yes, Commissioner Forcell.
On page 3 of the minutes, which is packet page 7, there is, I think, a typo when it said in new business, Commissioner Scharf elected Vice Chair Siegel as chair. I think that's meant to be nominated.
Yeah, I wish I had that power, just choose, but
Thank you. Any other changes?
I did have a couple of typos on page 2 of the minutes, packet page 6, in the paragraph on hydroelectric update, kind of the third line from the bottom, it says they are projected to produce about 245 this fiscal year. There are no units there. I assume that's 245 gigawatts per hour, but I think
correct.
that should be clarified. And then similarly on page 7 of the minutes, packet page 11, in the middle of the page in the paragraph that says in reply to Commissioner Forcell's inquiry, about 4 lines down, it says roughly $10 is spent. I'm assuming that's 10 million, but
Do you see that?
Thank you, Vice Chair Johnston. Those have been noted. And Commissioner Forcell.
Thanks. And Commissioner Metz, you had some changes as well?
Yeah, well, actually, I had not noticed those, but I think in the hydroelectric paragraph that Commissioner Johnston was talking about, I guess it's needs to be gigawatt hours in each case, not gigawatts per hour.
Got it. Any other updates to the minutes? So does anyone want to move to accept the minutes with those 3 changes as noted?
I'll move we accept the minutes as amended.
I'll second.
Great. And we'll take a vote. Commissioner Metz,
Yes.
Vice Chair Johnston,
Yes.
Commissioner Bowie,
Yes.
Commissioner Scharf,
Yes.
Commissioner Forcell,
Yes.
and I also approve as amended. Great. I do not believe we have any unfinished business, so we can move to the Utilities Director report.
Hello, Dave Yen, Utility Strategic Business Manager. I'm filling in for Mr. Dean Batcher today. He's somewhat under the weather, so I will try to run this as well as he does. So, Director's report, water supply update. Snowpack and precipitation for the Hetch Hetchy system are well below normal. However, storage is in relatively good shape. As of May 2nd, Total regional water system storage was 74% full. Normal system storage for this time of the year is 83%. On May 24th, SFPUC increased its call for regional water system-wide water use reductions from 10% to 11%, which will mean Palo Alto's voluntary cutback measure may increase from 8% to 10%. We're expecting to hear back from the SFPUC in mid-June on the cutback percentage. On May 24th, the State Board adopted emergency regulations that require urban water suppliers to implement Stage 2 drought actions and ban irrigation of ornamental turf with potable water in commercial, industrial, and institutional sectors, except to ensure the health of trees or to address any immediate health and safety need. On June 20th, staff plan to recommend that City Council implement Stage 2 of the water shortage contingency plan, which will require restaurants to serve water to customers only upon request and require hotels and motels to provide guests with the option of not having linens laundered daily. Additionally, staff plan to recommend council implement water use restrictions, limiting potable irrigation of ornamental landscapes and lawn to 2 days per week, except to ensure the health of trees and other perennial non-turf plantings. For hydroelectric update, as we've discussed previously, the 2021-22 water year has turned out to be the third straight very dry year for California. As of May 31st, precipitation totals in Northern and Central California are about 25 to 35% below average for this time of the year, after being above average through January. Water level at the state's reservoirs remain very low too. Across Northern and Central California, most reservoirs are about 30 to 50% below their average levels for this time of the year. As a result, Palo Alto's hydroelectric projections for FY22 and FY23 are very low as well. They are projected to produce about 245 gigawatt hours this fiscal year, which is about 51% below the long-term average, and 305 gigawatt hours in FY23, which is 65% below the long-term average. Summer electric grid challenges. This summer, staff expects the electric grid to be strained. In preparation for the situation, we are developing messaging to inform customers of actions they can take to help the system and themselves, including pre-cooling, pre-charge EVs and batteries, and using appliances between 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on hot days. Then avoid using AC, charging cars and batteries, and major appliances from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. on those days. Palo Alto Fiber project update. We have 251 pins of interest on the Palo Alto Fiber hub site. The city will be launching the City of Palo Alto Residential and Business Internet Survey in the next couple weeks. The city is asking for residents and business input toward the Palo Alto Fiber project. The survey will be open for about 4 to 6 weeks. The city will also be launching a $50 deposit program to demonstrate the community's willingness to subscribe to Palo Alto Fiber. This deposit does not require any commitment and is fully refundable. At the end, it's fully refundable. Next is new business programs. Businesses can now take advantage of newly launched programs from CPAU offering free consultations, site assessments, and rebates for facility efficiency upgrades, including the flagship concierge service called the Business Energy Advisor, and equipment rebates through the Business Customer Rebates Program. Find out more at cityofpaloalto.org/commercial programs. Lastly, we have some upcoming events we want to talk about. Details and registrations can be found at cityofpaloalto.org/workshops. On June 15th, Electrify Your Ride, that's scheduled from 7 to 8 p.m. Review available electric vehicles and e-bikes, as well as charging at home and on the road, incentives, and the total cost of ownership. You have the chance to ask the questions you've always wondered about EVs and e-bikes. And on June 18th, the MC Open House is back from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Join city staff as we showcase some of the behind-the-scenes work that we do for the Palo Alto community. Watch the utilities line crew pole climbing demonstrations every hour, 10:30, 11:30, 12:30, and 1:30. Bring your friends and your family for a fun and educational day featuring displays, food, music, and other activities. That's it.
Great, thank you. That event sounds fun. We can move on to new business, and first we will adopt the resolution authorizing teleconferencing for our meetings because of COVID. I think we've all seen this now quite a while. Does anyone have any discussion, or should we go straight to voting? No discussion. Does anyone want to move to adopt the resolution?
I move that we adopt the resolution.
In a second.
I'll second.
Great. So I'll go through. Commissioner Metz,
Yes.
Vice Chair Johnston,
Yes.
Commissioner Scharf,
Yes.
Commissioner Bowie,
Yes.
Commissioner Forcell,
Yes.
and I too approve the resolution authorizing teleconferencing. Okay, now we'll move to the next item, which is an action item, I believe, on the 2022 annual water shortage assessment. And we have a presentation on that.
Yes, we do. Or are there any, comments?
Oh,
from the
sorry.
public?
Any public comment on that? Thank you, Mr. Yuan.
There are no hands raised on Zoom or in here.
Great, thanks. We can go forward with presentation.
Yes, and tonight we have Lisa Belier, our interim senior resource planner, who will be presenting the water shortage assessment report.
Yes, thank you, Dave. Good evening, commissioners and council member. My name is Lisa Belier, and I'm an acting senior resource planner, and I'm here to tell you about the 2022 water shortage report. And I think that Dave is going to present, but if not, I have it handy. So this is the first year that we are required to submit this report to the state, and it's a requirement in the California Water Code. It's important that we submit this report. If we don't, then we can be disqualified from state grants and loans. We're following the procedures that we put forth in our urban water management plan, and those procedures include going to the Utility Advisory Commission and going to the council to request approval of this item. Dave, if you could go to the next slide. So what this requirement is that beginning in 2022 on July 1st and every year thereafter, we need to conduct an annual water supply and demand assessment and then submit an annual water shortage assessment report to the Department of Water Resources. And this is a report where we're projecting our supply and demand for the upcoming fiscal year 2023. The report itself really just consists of 5 tables. And I wanted to just say a little bit about the timeline, that because this is the first year that this report is required, the state came out with its guidance in April, early April, and then we compiled the report with that guidance, and that put us on time to have this meeting and the council meeting next week, where this will be considered in order to meet our deadline of July the 1st submittal. So really, I'm just going to walk you through the 5 tables. Feel free to ask me if you have any questions as I go. But the 5 tables are basically, the first table just has some overview information. The second table is demand, and specifically it's unconstrained demand. So this is demand that we project for fiscal year 23 without any demand reduction actions. And then table 3 compares, looks at supply. And specifically for Palo Alto, our supply in this projection, we used the water budgets that have been provided to us by the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, our supplier. And so then in table 4, we compare those 2 things, the unconstrained demand and the supply. And then the table 5 goes through an exercise of listing out all our current and proposed demand reduction actions and estimating for each one of those how it will meet the shortage gap between supply and demand. And what we found in this exercise, and it's on the next slide, is a 7% shortage gap between the unconstrained demand and the supply. So we have outlined in the table 5 all of the permanent water use restrictions, the stage 1 water use restrictions that the council enacted in March, and then our proposed restrictions that we are bringing to the council on June the 20th. And those are to move to stage 2 of our water shortage contingency plan, as Dave explained. And then also a 2-day per week watering restriction for ornamental landscape and lawn, except for the health of trees and other perennial non-turf plantings. And as Dave described, there's also actions from the state board limiting irrigation of ornamental lawn at commercial properties. So what we did is we used the drop-down menus from the state tables and aligned our different actions with those drop-down menus in order to, and then we made estimates for each of those items and showed that we can bring our shortage gap from the 7% projected down to 0%. So can we go to the next slide? Now, the next 2 slides are not intended for you to squint your eyes and try to read all the numbers. I really just wanted to show you a picture, just to give you a flavor of what the tables look like, because that's what this is about. It's these 5 tables. So this is table 4. This is the potable water part of table 4. There's also a non-potable section, but I didn't highlight it because there really is no shortage gap for our recycled water that we're providing in Palo Alto to select city properties. So this is a picture of table 4. You can see, or maybe you can't see, it's quite small, but there's a 7% gap at the top of the table. And at the bottom of the table, it shows all the demand reductions that we're going to achieve and how we're going to get to a 0% gap. And then the next slide is a picture of table 5. And this is where we list out all the demand reduction actions. And with that, the next slide, I think, has the request. Yeah, so we are requesting that the Utility Advisory Commission recommend that the council adopt the Nano Water Shortage Assessment Report. And then we will go ahead and submit this to the Department of Water Resources to meet our requirement by July 1st. And I should add that one of the things the state required is for us to submit a draft by June 1st, and I did go ahead and do that. But we'll be submitting the actual final one and incorporating any feedback that you may have. With that, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Belier. Vice Chair Johnston.
Yes, thank you for that report. And I mean, this is obviously an interesting topic, and it ties in with the director's report here. One of the questions I had is on table 4. Maybe you could put that up again. Yes, the anticipated unconstrained demand, the first line. How does that compare with our actual experience over the last year? Because the reason I ask is we've already been implementing some water restriction measures. And so I'm trying to figure out how we came up with the baseline.
That's a good question. And I just want to step back and say that when we did our urban water management plan in 2021, we had to outline at that time what the procedures were going to be to estimate our unconstrained demand. And what the procedure said is that we would be using a demand model that was run by Bosca to forecast that number for fiscal year 2023. So that is what we did. I will say, in answer to your question, that our current demand this year is actually about the same so far through May as the unconstrained demand that's listed here. So that's maybe in the future we could, better change our methods to estimate the unconstrained demand, but that's what it is right now.
Well, I think it would be useful to kind of see what our actual demand is compared to to this, the assumptions here, and because it raises the question, if we're already using water at about the level of the anticipated unconstrained demand, and we've already implemented certain water restrictions, how do we have confidence that we can reach we can cover the shortage?
Right. And I just want to reframe it slightly that when we are looking at how much we need to reduce our demand, what we have to do is meet what our supplier is requesting of us, and that is to meet the water budgets that they have requested. Currently, we're not actually meeting that goal, but we're hopeful because those have been in effect so far this year since January. We're about 3% above that. Sorry, we're about 5% above that water budget level through the end of May. And but we're hopeful that the new measures that we are implementing, or that we're requesting to implement, or going to the council to request their consideration, is going to help us to meet those goals. And I will also say that demand in Palo Alto has been influenced by COVID and COVID responses. So when you look at our demand in 2021 and 2022, it has actually increased during COVID because of the effects of the stay-at-home associated with COVID. So I think there's a lot of different things going on. And also in this year, we've had a very dry period. In January through March of 2022 was the driest on record at the Hetch Hetchy gauge, which means it's the driest on record for about 125 years. So I think a lot of different things influence customer demand. We've had customers basically turning on their irrigation earlier this year. Maybe that won't happen again next year. It's hard to predict what the weather is going to bring on a month-to-month basis, but we're constantly looking at those numbers from San Francisco. We're reconsidering the actions that we need to take. And but for this purpose of this report, we do have to follow the methods that were outlined in our urban water management plan. We need to follow the standard guidelines from the state, from the Department of Water Resources, on how to put these tables together. So I
take it there's no kind of direct penalty if our actual numbers don't meet the numbers that we show in this report. Is that right?
No. But what could result in a penalty in the future, maybe in a few months, a couple of months, if San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, who provides all of our potable water, if they don't see the reduction system-wide that they need to see, they could move to a mandatory situation, and that could result in penalties for Palo Alto if we do not keep our usage below our budget.
Yeah. My concern here is that a lot of the things that we're talking about, we've already, that's on the list in table 5, a lot of these things I think we've already implemented. And the ones that, the new ones that you're talking about, saying that lodging establishments might offer opt-out for daily linen change, and restaurants only serve water upon request, and landscaping 2 days a week except to protect the trees. I just wonder, whether many of those aren't already being implemented. Every hotel I go to or have gone to recently has said, given me the option to not have the linen changed. So I just wonder whether the measures that we're talking about are really going to have much of an incremental impact.
The other one that I wanted to point out is the 2-day per week watering. We do not actually have a limit on the number of days that of watering in Palo Alto currently. So the state's ban on non-functional turf watering for commercial properties, and then the staff recommendation to move to 2-day per week watering for ornamental landscape and lawn. We hope that will have an impact. And I also wanted to just point out the bigger picture is we really need to try to conserve 8% from our fiscal year 1920 levels. So although we have had some very dry months of weather so far this year, our most recent month looks encouraging. It's been a little bit cooler, and we're hopeful that these measures will allow us to make that 8% cutback as we continue to get the word out and engage with customers about water conservation through our suite of programs, conservation programs and outreach.
So I hope as we're implementing these kind of additional measures, I hope there'd be some way that we'd be able to measure what impact they have. Because I'm concerned that they may not have as much impact as we're predicting here, because I think many of them are already being followed. Anyway, thank you very much for the report.
Commissioner Forcell, I believe you had your hand up.
I did. Thank you, Chair. Let's see. Many of my questions were along the same lines as Vice Chair Johnston already brought up. As a follow-up to his line of questioning, one of the things you mentioned is that the state is going to be limiting commercial watering of non-functional turf. And that's not a measure that the city will take, that's a measure that the state is taking, but the savings provided is the savings that provided to the city regardless of who mandated it. Do we have any kind of estimate of how much water is used by commercial non-functional turf?
Sorry, I would say we really do not have an estimate of that. But what we did is use our best estimate and included that whole package of landscape days in the line item on landscape irrigation number of days limitation.
I see. Okay, so the savings of 135 acre feet for the months of July. Oh, I see. For the year, this is the number of acre feet expected to be saved over the year July 2022 through June 2023.
That's correct.
Okay, so then that's a good segue into my next question. Where do these numbers come from? And in particular, it is to me eye-popping that drinking water can save 45 acre feet. Can you speak to that?
These are, so in our urban water management plan, for each of these categories of reductions, we made an estimate of the percentage reduction of a shortage gap at each level that could be achieved through the different types of measures. And when we are doing this report, we're following a standard method that has to be followed across all the urban water suppliers across California. So we're really doing our best effort to come up with an estimate for each of the measures, but I'm open to feedback on changing any of the estimates. And it's really just a best estimate.
But it sounds like it is utilities staff doing their best estimate as opposed to being handed down from some state agency that like, this is how you calculate it.
This is, sorry. This is the staff, Palo Alto staff's best estimate. And if you think changes are needed, we can make those changes.
Well, I think I already said my piece that 45 acre feet sounds like a lot for something that starts, 8 or 12 ounces at a time. It does feel like that's surprising compared to the savings possible with other methods. I think I had one other question. Oh yeah. It's a small thing, but on page 6 of the report, packet page 24, table number 3, which is the supply. I was curious as to why the supply of recycled water dips in the winter. Like I would understand demand dipping, but I don't understand why supply goes down.
So For recycled water, what we did is just because there is sufficient supply to meet demand, we set supply equal to demand. So it's based on the demand. That's why the supply is higher, because there's no limit. There's enough supply to meet the demand, no matter what the demand is at the levels that we're looking at.
And on a physical basis, what happens to recycled water that's not used? Does it just go to the bay?
Carla, do you have a?
Sentiment in the room is that it's probably discharged to the bay. So, all right, thank you. That was it for me in questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Forcell. Commissioner Scharf?
Yeah, thanks. So I guess maybe I just don't understand this. Why in the winter months do we have less water supply? So it's, on top you have anticipated unconstrained demand, anticipated total water supply. I mean, when it's supposed to be raining, we have no water, right? I mean, 643 versus 1100. Why is that?
Okay, so what we used for supply for this table is the water budgets that San Francisco has provided us with an annual water budget, but it's split up into months. And the annual amount is based on the fiscal year 1920 total, and the monthly amounts are based on our fiscal year 20 to 21 usage. So basically, based on our past patterns, they figured out an amount that we would be assigned in our water supply each month based on the total annual reduction from fiscal year 1920 levels of 8%.
Okay, so do they actually have less water? I mean, I don't understand. Why would they have less water? Why wouldn't it be like, and that goes to my other question. I mean, I noticed everything's in effect from July to June. And you would think we'd have more water. I guess that's the confusing part to me. And I guess it would just assign it. Well, why do they want to sell less water in January and February to us? I mean, do they save it, or does it overtop the reservoir and we use it? I mean, are they?
Right.
Are they expecting? Is this because they expect no rain at all next year? Or I just confused.
Yeah, and I think this gets into the fact that this is a standard format that's used across all the urban water suppliers across California. And the Department of Water Resources is recommending to do this analysis on a monthly basis. And if not on a monthly basis, then at least on a quarterly basis. For us in our situation, it may make sense to do it on an annual basis because we're not necessarily looking at a shortage in one particular month of the year. So I think this is an effort to conform our situation to the state format and come up with the monthly numbers based upon the monthly supply that we do have from San Francisco in terms of our voluntary budgets.
So I guess what I care about really is, one, are we making it as easy as possible on our residents? And if we don't need to do certain things, like in the winter months, we don't have restrictions in the winter months that are not needed. So I guess if we need them, then we need them. But if we don't need them, we shouldn't have them. So I have that concern. I have the opposite concerns of Commissioner Johnson. My concerns are we actually providing when we say limit the landscape to 2 days, have we decided that that's enough? Is that going to be enough to protect the trees, and which you said except for landscape to the trees? So does that mean people are allowed to water their trees if they're worried about them, and are we just not going to enforce? Are we not worrying about that? I mean, I'm just confused. So if people out there using hoses on their trees, I mean, that's perfectly acceptable, and that's same with perennial plants, right? That need extra water or whatever, so they don't lose their perennials. We're fine with people, not watering their lawns, obviously, which is what we're limiting that to 2 days, and then their annual their annual flowers or whatever, right? I mean, that's the thought. You can tell I do a lot of gardening, so I'm not exactly sure. I just wanted to make sure if we thought through the effects on the individual plants, and we've decided that what we're offering here should work for most landscaping, so people don't lose thousands of dollars worth of landscaping through this process unnecessarily. That's really my concern.
Okay, thank you for that. And I just want to clarify that what this item is discussing is just the water shortage report that we need to submit to the state. And there's a slight timing issue here where staff is making estimates based on a staff proposal that we plan to bring to the council. And because that is our best estimate of what we can expect to be implemented in the projected period, which is fiscal year 2023 here. So, but all the comments that you're making go to the proposal that staff is planning to bring to the council on the 2-day per week watering, and everything you said about that is pretty much accurate.
Okay, good. I mean, I understand you want us to vote for this because you needed to, check the box for the state and all of that, and I'm sure we will. But when we bring that other stuff to the council, that I just wanted to register my concerns that we make it practical for people in Palo Alto and that they don't lose, valuable landscaping unnecessarily.
Thank you.
And when do you expect to bring that back? And is that going to go to the UAC 2 first, or what's the thought on that?
The thought on that is that it's planned to go to council on June the 20th, because we were trying to make sure to propose that action before the irrigation season.
So we won't get any input into that stuff. So you really just want us to check the box on the report and say we're good with that.
I will be summarizing your feedback for
Okay,
the
great.
council, and so I can include that information there.
All right, I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other commissioner questions? I had a couple. One is simple, which is what's the breakdown of water usage, of potable water usage, commercial versus residential in Palo Alto?
Residential is about 64%.
Okay. And then I guess I'm getting the sense that this is a report we have to fill out because the state told us we had to fill it out, but it doesn't have great impact on what we decide as a city in terms of, dealing with drought in a way that makes sense for the city. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I just would add that because we do have to fill this out every year going forward, I will try to make it as meaningful as possible, taking into account any feedback in the future.
Right. I mean, I'm not suggesting that, presumably we're going to, some subset or all of what's in this report will be discussed at city council and maybe implemented. I guess I'm also wondering if, let's say we submit this report next year and our numbers look very different because maybe some of these measures were more or less successful than we predicted, do we create any challenges for ourselves going forward next year with this report? Now that we've put in what our proposals are, is it flexible for the future?
I think it's flexible for the future, but we would just report on what happens next time.
Okay. And then I guess, will there be a separate discussion about communication efforts to whatever it is we decide to do, since many of these water restriction measures are in place and it doesn't seem to have had a great impact. And I appreciate that maybe it's because the weather hasn't cooperated, but the weather is going to be what the weather is going to be. So do we have a plan? Is that something we'll see? Is that something you'll discuss with council?
Well, in our upcoming report, we do have some plans for outreach and communications listed in the report on how we're going to the stage 2 and the water use restrictions. So I can't provide that report right now. It's still being reviewed, but that will be an opportunity to discuss that.
I also want to add that we are hiring like an hourly water coordinator to help educate and also, say fine people who aren't following the rules, but at least give them warnings, I guess, and advising them. So that person is being in the process of getting hired.
Okay, that's helpful. And presumably now that the election is over, maybe we'll hear more about the drought from the state level, which we have in the past as well. So we'll see, but that's great. Any other questions from anyone? Great. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Cormack.
Oh, well done, Chair Siegel. I'm like, can she see if I wave? I just, Mr. Yuan, if you could put back up the slide with the orange things, and let me just, staff's going to correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just trying to connect Commissioner Scharf's questions with the answers. And so it makes sense that, well, I can see why you asked, like, if it's raining, why don't we have more supply available? But the issue is that supply number, that second row, is really based on demand we've had in the past, correct? And we have a lower demand in the winter months because usually we are not irrigating, these lovely gardens and lawns and trees and other plants that we have in Palo Alto. So that's this strange disconnect we always have in water, where we use less during the rainy season, if there actually is rain. So it's not that they don't have the water available in the winter. It's not, the availability of the water doesn't really vary throughout the year to us. It varies in the storage area. Obviously, if there were a multi-year drought, then it would vary to us. So I just, this is such a complicated area, but I just wanted to point out that, while Ms. Belier gave the correct detailed answer, the difference is that supply line is based on what we have used in the past, adjusted, right? Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Cormack. Any other last thoughts? Would somebody like to move that the UAC recommend the City Council adopt the 2022 Annual Water Shortage Assessment Report as presented? I can't.
I will so move.
I'll second.
Start, Commissioner Scharf. Can't hear you.
Put on mute. Yes.
Commissioner Bowie.
Yes.
Vice Chair Johnston.
Yes.
Commissioner Metz.
Yes.
Commissioner Forcell.
Yes.
And I also approve. Thank you, Ms. Belier. We will now turn to item 3, which is a discussion and update of the wildfire safety mitigation plan. And, is there any community comments on that?
Chair, there are no hands raised in Zoom or the room.
Thank you. Do we have a presentation?
No. Shouldn't have done that. Sorry about that. I shouldn't have been unmuted. So no, there is no presentation tonight, but we do have Heather Dollar, our acting compliance manager. I think she will give a verbal update and also answer any questions you may have. So let me turn it over to Heather.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. As Dave noted, I do have a verbal presentation. Speaking of completing reports because the state tells us to, I'm here to provide information about our wildfire mitigation plan update. This is a plan that is a relatively new requirement, which began in 2020. Specifically, each electric utility in the state is to document its plan to mitigate against catastrophic line ignited wildfires. This year, electric utilities submitted their first ever plan. That is the year, in 2020, when we submitted the first ever plan to the newly created Wildfire Safety Advisory Board. The plans are legally required to contain 14 specific elements ranging from vegetation management to line inspections to protocols for disabling reclosers and more. Because the highest risk area for a line ignited wildfire in our territory is in the foothills, our plan is mostly specific to that area. This is in line with what other POUs are doing as well. The UAC received a presentation of the outline of our original plan back in September of 2019, with a council presentation following in January of 2020. The 2021 update went before the UAC in June of 2021, and today is the 2022 update. Importantly, the law does not define what update means, nor speak about its scope, what it's supposed to look like, or any particular requirements, only that we have to complete one every year, and every 3 years complete a comprehensive revision of the plans. The POU community has interpreted update literally, meaning updating the status of the projects from plan to plan. Excuse me. The Wildfire Safety Board did review the first set of updates and expressed that they would like to see a little bit more than just simple update of the projects, while they also acknowledge that there is no requirement to provide anything more. So for the 2022 update, we not only noted the changed status of our projects, but also added more information and context as noted on page 1 of the staff report under the discussion header. In addition to the changes noted in the staff report, we moved the cross-reference table to the front of the report, noted the establishment of City Council's ad hoc SCAP committee, specified the geographical territory of the foothills area, clarified the communications role of the Office of Emergency Services Department during emergencies, and more. The intent behind these basic refinements is to walk that line between responding to the Wildfire Board's recommendations for more context, while also not straying too far from the legal scope and direction of these plans. The red lines that you see in the plans are intentional. They're at the request of the board and will remain in the plan when submitted in advance of the July 1st deadline. Later this year, we will start working on that comprehensive revision, which is also an undefined term in the law, but we understand the intent to be something more robust than an update. So our revision will include opening up the entire plan for a review of each element, collaborating with other related departments such as Fire and Public Works, and retaining an independent evaluator to review and comment on our draft plan. We intend to present that newly revised plan as well as the evaluation report to the UAC prior to July 1st of 2023. This concludes my update. There is no action, motion, or resolution required of the UAC.
Any questions from any commissioners? Yes, Vice Chair Johnston.
Thanks for the report. And I did look at the red lines, the updates to the plan. And obviously there are a lot of things in there that we say we are going to be doing. Obviously, I think we'll be interested to know what progress we're making on those things that we said we would do. And I hope that that's something you could kind of update us on. I think you said you're going to come back to us before July of 2023. So hopefully you'll have an update for us then of what's actually been accomplished.
Yes.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? I just had one question, which was with some of the plan, it requires certain staff to respond in certain ways depending on the situation. And I don't know that all those positions are filled right now. And so do we have backup employees so that if a position isn't full, there's someone who is always designated with those obligations?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, Great. Thanks. Any other questions? Well, great. Thank you for the presentation. We'll look forward to hearing the update sometime.
Great, thank you.
Future. We can turn to the electric utility IRP and see whether there are any public comments.
If there's any member of the public, either on Zoom or in person, who wishes to ask, please raise your hand or press *9. Chair Siegel, I see no hands raised.
Thank you. I think Dr. Stack, are you here to present on this item?
Yes, we do have two presenters tonight. We have Jim Stack, Senior Resource Planner, along with Lena Perkins, also Senior Resource Planner, both doctorates, I must say.
I was
So,
going to say you brought out the big guns.
yes, it's a heavy topic. All right, I'm going to hand that off to, I think, Jim first.
Great. Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Chair Siegel and commissioners. I'll share my screen. Can everybody see the title slide? Great.
Yes, Mr. Stack, thank you.
All right, so good evening. I'm Jim Stack, Senior Resource Planner with the utility, and I'm here tonight along with Lena Perkins to kick off the process of developing our integrated resource plan for 2023. This is going to be a roughly 1.5 year long process, and we go through it every 5 years. And it's our opportunity to kind of look holistically at our entire electric supply portfolio. So it's a big project, and we're really excited to get to work on it with you guys. And before I dive in, I just wanted to state up front that we're going to have quite a few opportunities to talk with you about the IRP over the next 1.5 years. So tonight's presentation is really intended just to kind of introduce the whole process of integrated resource planning to you and talk about Palo Alto's history with IRPs and the official requirements that the state has for our IRP. And then we're going to talk about some of the big decisions that we're facing in this process, namely related to the Western-based resource contract and our share of the California-Oregon transmission projects. And then we're going to try to lay out our proposed plan of action for completing the IRP, which we need to do by the end of next year, 2023. And the planning horizon for the IRP is supposed to be from 2024 through 2035. And then we'd like to hopefully get some feedback from the commission about all of these topics and help us move forward. So looking at the UAC roster, I believe about half of you commissioners were here 5 years ago and involved in the process then. So this will be a bit of a refresher course for those folks. And it'll also be an introduction to IRPs for those who weren't on the UAC last time around. So basically, IRPs are tools that utilities have been using for decades. And what they are is basically a long-term roadmap. They usually are for cover a period of 10 years or more. And where you lay out what your forecasted electric demand is over that period of time. And then you try to figure out what is the optimal mix of resources to use to satisfy that demand. And in IRPs, when we talk about resources, we're very explicitly including demand side resources along with more traditional generation resources. And we're evaluating them all on an equal footing. So determining that ideal mix of resources can be very tricky. Obviously, we want to minimize our supply costs and our cost uncertainty or risk. But in addition, we also need to make sure that our plan takes into account a variety of other factors as well, such as regulatory requirements, sustainability objectives, and customer preferences. CPAU has a long history in integrated resource planning. In fact, a couple of days ago, I was going through some documents in my office, and I came across a report from 1976 that was evaluating various alternative resource options. So we go way back with IRPs. Our first official one was in the early 90s, 1992. I believe before that period of time, we were essentially getting our full supply from the Western-based resource contract. So we didn't really need to do a whole lot of resource evaluation prior to that period of time. Starting in 2001, we began calling our IRP a long-term electric acquisition plan, or LEAP. And then it was basically the same thing as an IRP though. After that, in the early 2000s, the state and the city started to adopt more and more aggressive climate goals and requirements. And some of those included some very prescriptive procurement requirements, like our RPS requirements, for example. So the scope of what resources we can actually consider in our IRPs is now considerably narrower than it used to be, several decades ago. And then in 2015, that was a real change when the state adopted Senate Bill 350, SB 350. And that bill included a 50% by 2030 RPS requirement, along with new energy efficiency requirements. And this law also included an official requirement for larger utilities like ours to do an IRP. And we were required under that law to submit our first IRP, or complete the IRP, by the end of 2018 and submit it to the California Energy Commission in early 2019. And of course we did that. And then also in this law is a requirement that we update our IRP every 5 years. So that's what officially brings us here tonight. Now, there are quite a few formal requirements that our IRPs have to meet to be in compliance with SB 350, and they're summarized on this slide as well as the following slide. I would say this law has sort of become the legislature's new way of prescribing the kinds of resources that we should consider and all the different policies and objectives we should focus on. But these are all things that essentially we were doing before and we would continue to be doing anyway. So it's not a real big ask for us. Of all of these IRP requirements, I believe they're almost all the same as the requirements we had in our previous IRP. I think the only new ones are the last two on this slide, where we have to talk about how our rate design supports transportation electrification and how we'll ensure grid reliability in the hours around the grid's net peak hours. So with that, I think I will turn it over to my colleague Lena Perkins to talk about some of the key issues that we're going to be addressing in this IRP, unless there are any questions on the first part of the presentation so far.
All right, thank you, Jim. I did not unmute myself, so I think this is going to work. And as Jim alluded to, this is our second formal IRP. We completed our last one in 2019, and so this is the next 5-year iteration. And we're really excited for, and I have control, I think. And we're really excited to embark on this IRP with you because we have a couple of key policy questions that we can work through during this process. And the first, and Jim alluded to these, but I'll restate them because I'm going to go through them in more detail. One is how much, if any, of the Western base resource to renew our contract for. And the second is this transmission asset to the north, the COTP. So I'll go through those in greater detail now. Oh, right. Page down. Okay, so the Western Base Resource Contract Decision, if it feels like you just approved this contract, it's because you did. And so this is for the time period from 2025 to 2054. And so with the new contract, we have until June 24th to revisit this decision and change our allocation amount. And so, we intend to use the full time period available to us to make sure that we use all the information that we can to make this decision. And again, we do have off ramps every 5 years. So while we would be signing up from 2025 to 2054, we again have the option to exit the contract or reduce the amount in 2030. So this is a foundational resource for Palo Alto. It's a lot of different generators spread throughout mostly Northern California, but you'll see also, New Melones on the San Joaquin and a couple other smaller ones. It's about 40% of the city's energy supply, and the annual cost is about $12 million. I think we've talked about this, at length, but when we can talk about it some more, but this is kind of an introduction at this point. And again, we're going to talk about this decision and the next one in separate presentations further along the process. This is an overview. So, so you can see here what the Western-based resource is anticipated to be for 2022, which is, sort of less than half of what its historical average has been, and the historical average is what is projected forward in this slide. And so if we did discontinue this resource, in its entirety, we would be left with a pretty large gap in our supply portfolio, which then we could choose to fill with other things. And so it's shown there in the hashed blue. I can walk through this graph in greater detail if you would like, but I'll just move along. And then the California-Oregon transmission project decision is probably a new one to most of you here. And that's because we laid it off in 2008 with a 15-year layoff that will be ending at the end of 2023. And this is a transmission asset. It's 340 miles long, 1,600 megawatts, 500 kV transmission, and it's between Southern Oregon and Central California. Palo Alto's share is 51 megawatts. And so, for context, if you were to straight line average Palo Alto's loads, it's about 100 megawatts. So this is about half. Of course, our load is not flat, but just for context. And that is about, 4% of the tank portion of the COTP. We have a number of options with this. We can decide to extend the layoff. We can renegotiate a new layoff, and we could also use the project or, for resources that we contract with, or we could actually enter it into the CAISO market for options or sort of offload it entirely. So we'll be working through that during this process as well.
Can I ask a quick technical question? Laying something off, does that just mean selling or leasing or rent? Like, what does layoff mean specifically?
Yeah, and it's a good question. It depends on the terms of the layoff. For this, we have our O&M is covered because we already built the asset. And so it didn't include paying the off-takers were not paying the capital portion of the asset. And that's what we negotiated. And it can also have different clawback provisions, but it's essentially reversible in a way that a total sale would not be reversible, right? There's an exit, there's an end to it where a layoff always comes back to the original owner. So that's what a layoff is versus just selling it outright to someone else.
Thank you.
So with that, I will let Jim actually present the work plan and the IRP objectives going forward. Jim, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you, Lena. So we have a number of objectives we're trying to meet as we go through this 1.5-year long process. First and foremost, obviously, we want to fully comply with all the IRP requirements that we have under SB 350. That's number one. Next, as Lena just discussed, we have 2 major portfolio decisions that we have to make in the next 1.5 to 2 years. So we will be trying to arrive at a very well thought through decision on each of those two asset decisions we're making. And then last but not least, we also want to use this opportunity to try to engage the community in this process and kind of solicit some of their input into these 2 decisions, as well as other strategic questions about the direction we want to take the portfolio in the next 10 plus years. So this is a good opportunity to do that as well. Now, as broad as that, the IRP sounds, we also want to be clear about what it is not. It's not the be all end all document for the entire utility. So the IRP is not intended to be an update of the utility strategic plan. This is not supposed to be the process for designing and scoping customer programs or coming up with all the new SCAP initiatives we need to fully reach our 2030 goals. And although we will be touching on some distribution system resources, some demand side resources, which obviously have an impact on our distribution system, this is not intended to be the venue to do all of our serious long-term distribution system planning. So I just wanted to get those caveats out there to try to limit the scope somewhat of our IRP. So in terms of the next steps in the process, I have another slide in a second showing kind of our timeline for our future discussions with all of you. But in the immediate future, first step will be to issue a renewable energy and storage RFP. And we're going to be doing that so that we have some alternative options to compare the Western contract against. And I'm happy to report that we actually issued that a couple of weeks ago, and it's out on the street right now. So we're expecting responses by the end of this month. And have our fingers crossed that we get a good mix of different attractive offers to consider. Once we have those offers in place, we're going to be also contracting to use some portfolio modeling and optimization software. And this is pretty, the software that we have in mind is pretty robust, statistical modeling suite of tools that is designed specifically for utilities to do this sort of modeling and IRP optimization. And it'll allow us to take all of our current set of committed resources and kind of swap in or out, the Western contract or the various alternative resource options we get through the RFP to try to figure out what is the optimal collection of resources to utilize going forward. And then on a parallel track, kind of while we're doing that portfolio optimization work, we're also going to be working with our colleagues at the Northern California Power Agency, as well as an outside transmission consultant to help us analyze the different possible post-layoff uses of COTP that Lena alluded to earlier. And we'll be discussing with some other, other COTP owners, the potential for a new layoff or purchasing the resource for us. We've already had some initial discussions with at least one other utility on that, and there's definitely interest in taking on our share of the asset once our layoff ends. And then finally, we're going to be trying to solicit public input on the direction of the supply portfolio. So we welcome your suggestions, your thoughts on how the best way we can do that would be. On this slide, I have the set of meetings we have planned to discuss all of these different topics with you. Coming up later this year, we'll be discussing COTP and Western in more detail, and doing a look into our load forecasts and what kinds of scenarios we should think about when forecasting our load for the IRP. Hopefully early next year, we'll be able to bring to you some of those results from the RFP that we have on the street right now, and the portfolio optimization work that we will do once we get those results in. And then finally, we'll begin bringing you the full long-term plan, the IRP itself, kind of a draft version, and then the final version toward the end of next year. And we may bring this as well to the SCAP committee of the City Council. We've been discussing that internally as well, so we're trying to figure out what the right time to do that step as well would be. And with that, I think I will open it up to questions. I did want to mention that on that load and supply graph that Lena presented earlier, we did have an alternate version that Commissioner Siegel requested that we change the order to show the renewed Western contract at the top, kind of being sort of the marginal resource. We've also drawn a dotted line showing what our load forecast would be, assuming that we implement all of the recommended SCAP programs that have been discussed and recommended for approval so far. So that dotted line is shown there as an increase in our load over that period of time. So with that, we can take any questions the commission has.
Thank you. Any commissioners? Okay, Vice Chair Johnston.
So just starting with this, first of all, thanks for the presentation. I mean, I was one of the people who was on the UAC when we went through this back in 2018, 2019. I went back and looked at what we came up with and remembered that it's a very important and very interesting process. So I'm looking forward to going through it with you all. I'm really happy that you put up this last slide, because I think that it's really important that we think about this, thinking about our load and what the SCAP programs would do to our projected load. And that's obviously going to have a big impact on what we think we need in terms of resources. So thank you for that. Thank you, Chair Siegel, for suggesting it, because it's very helpful to me. I had a couple of questions on, well, I guess it's on slide 16. I'm interested in, I'm sorry, it isn't, it's 16 in my packet, but it's the one before this one. Right. So I'm interested in this, the RFP that it's the first bullet point, and sounds like this has already gone out. What can you give us a kind of a short summary of what you're asking for in that RFP? What are you asking for people to provide to us?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. So we're essentially looking for renewable energy or zero carbon generation resource developers to come to us with proposals for new long-term contracts. We're looking for to sign new power purchase agreements anywhere from 10 years to 25 years in duration. And the RFP is looking for up to 250 gigawatt hours per year of generation altogether. So essentially, we're looking to receive offers for new types of carbon-free generation that we could sign up for on a long-term basis that would essentially replace Western if we decided to exit the agreement in 2025 rather than start a new contract with Western. So we're looking for renewable resources and large hydro or other zero carbon resources. We're providing the opportunity for proposals to include storage associated with the resource, or just standalone renewable energy generation with no storage. We're requesting offers for local generation that would help us, avoid lower our transmission costs and improve local reliability. Although I think we should, temper expectations a little bit about what we might receive in terms of the volume of those offers and so forth. That's essentially the scope of what we're looking for in the RFP.
So to summarize, you're looking for try to figure out what all the options are out there that we could use to replace the Western, the power that we get from the Western agreement.
That's right. Yeah, we're trying to cast the net broadly so we can get a good assortment of offers out there that represent the market.
And when do you think you will have responses that you'll be ready to talk about?
Well, responses will come in by the end of the month. It will take us a while to kind of, sift through those and put them into the portfolio modeling software. There's more to it than just what the contract price is, depending on where in the state or where in the Western US the resource is located, it'll have a different value depending on what type of resource it is and what its generation profile it is. It has different value. So we need to, factor all that into, our decision making. And so we're probably not going to be able to, share too much in detail about our thoughts on what we receive until, the very end of this year or beginning of next year, I would guess.
So with that, when we talk about that you're projecting that we have a discussion in November about the COTP and Western Base Resource discussion. That would obviously help inform that discussion if we know what the alternatives are.
Okay, that's a good point.
And then, I'm also interested in the software that we're getting to model and optimize our portfolio. I'm assuming that it's more cost effective for us to buy the software and to run the models ourselves than to have a consultant do that.
I think the way that we're anticipating doing this would be to sort of, lease the software rather than own it outright, lease it for a certain amount of time so that we can run it ourselves. It is expensive to outsource that to a consultant to run for us.
Right, that sounds. And the last thing, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but obviously figuring out how to effectively get public input on these issues, I think, is always a little bit of a problem. I mean, we've in the past, we've done workshops, we've done surveys and so on. I think, I hope we can come up with some creative ways to kind of get the information out so that we can get really useful information back from our customers. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to working with you on this.
Likewise.
Thanks. I think we're actually going to take a break for one public comment because we're so ahead of schedule. I think he missed the window at the front. So Mr. Lindgren, if you're still there, you have you may speak. We usually have 3 minutes. I don't know if we lost him.
Mr. Lindgren, if you could unmute yourself.
I still can't hear you. Can you hear in chambers?
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, can I share my screen?
I don't know that you can.
I want to show a figure.
Mr. Lundgren, you should be able to share your screen with us.
Okay. Okay, I don't see my share option here. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying, I don't see a way to share my screens.
Yeah, it should be like a green rectangle with a green arrow up is the icon. It should say share screen.
Mr. Lundgren, you have been promoted as a panelist, so you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, we see it now. Thank you. So Lindgren, you might be on mute.
Mr. Lindgren, we can't hear you.
Okay, there we go. Okay, I got my screen here. Can you see the screen I'm showing?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, this is the CIA ISO screen of our electricity demand on a day-by-day basis. And then also I have the demand with electricity coming from natural gas. And also I have the percentage of the natural gas generated. So that's what I wanted to show. And what is alarming is the percentage of natural gas generated of electricity in 2001. You know, on one day in last year, natural gas power plants put out 56.8% of the total demand. That was in the summer. You know, I've heard that this summer, you know, it might be even worse. You know, we're going to be running short of electricity and will require rolling blackouts. California needs more generating capacity to make sure this does not happen. But there's another problem, you know, that we haven't really talked about, and that's during the trading day, renewable electricity becomes very plentiful, that the grid can, you know, there's more electricity than the grid can use. And that becomes a negative asset. And then these vendors are actually charged for their electricity. You know, that doesn't make a very good incentive for having these, you know, for having all the solar panels. Now, let me say a few words on how I put these plots together, because it's interesting and very time consuming. No, the CIA ISO website has got a wealth of data that is available, you know, for download. And the daily demand energy is recorded in 5-minute segments. This means that for every 5 minutes, the total energy in megawatt hours is tabulated. What I did is I summed these 5-minute segments for each day. And this is a very boring process, but it took a while, many hours. The data was recorded on a spreadsheet for each day in 2021. And that same process was used to record the energy generated by natural gas plants. The next step was to plot the data. So I you know, obvious thing is to plot the data on a day-by-day basis. But that was a total mess. You know, there's just no way to comprehend any kind of order. You know, we got weekends and holidays, and that just messed up everything. So I tried a 3-day moving average, and that looked a little bit better. But then I tried a 7-day, and then that looked much better, and you can get some kind of comprehension of what was going on. So that's what I've got plotted there. Now, regarding your public...
Mr. Lundgren,
yes?
if you could wrap it up, please.
Yep, I'm working as fast as I can here. Regarding public feedback, regarding the electric utilities integrated resource plan, the utility should continue its best efforts to achieve low-cost renewable electricity sources. But more attention should be developing new energy sources, and this means to store energy for use in night hours. This is not the time to increase electricity demand, but to increase sources and storage. Now, regarding buying the so-called carbon offsets, I suggest that this process be discontinued. After all, who are we kidding or trying to fool? Palo Alto purchased clean electricity with lots of renewable, but sells electricity from the grid. Last year in 2021, 35.8% of our electricity customers used came from natural gas power plants. Instead of procuring carbon offsets, I suggest the utility get involved in energy storage means. This should not, I repeat, not be lithium ions type battery storage. Lithium ion is too expensive on a large scale.
Mr. Lindgren, can we please ask you to wrap it up?
Yeah, give me a
Thank you.
few, come on, give me a time. There should not be, the lithium ion is too expensive on a large scale. This is much work. There's much work going on in this area. There's two companies that I'm aware of that look interesting. One is Antora Energy, and what they want to do is heat large graphite blocks to 1500 degrees C and use the radiated energy to create electricity. It's been difficult to find out what progress they're making. I'm not sure if they're just getting money for grants or whatever, but, and then the other company is Power H2, and they want to use electricity to generate hydrogen and use that hydrogen to generate electricity. This sounds good on paper. So, but both utility, Palo Utility and UAC could possibly set up meetings just to find out what progress they have made. It looks good. How about a joint, if it does look good, how about a joint meeting with other utilities on a pilot program? This would be much better than sending money to a pig farmer in Wisconsin to cut back on methane production. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lindgren. And I invite you to send that as an email to the UAC so we have the benefit of
You have it. It should be, you should have it.
Oh, okay, great. Maybe it hasn't, I haven't seen it. Thank
Yeah,
you so much.
I hope you all are looked at that.
Great. Thank you for your thoughts.
Mhm.
I know we had some other commissioner hands up as well.
We had Commissioner Metz, Commissioner Forcell, and then Commissioner Bowie.
Great. Okay, we can go in that order. Metz, Forcell, Bowie. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you.
I'm sorry to interrupt. If you could stop sharing your screen, Mr. Lindgren, that would be helpful. as well. Thanks
okay.
so much.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you both for the hard work on this. I can see a lot of work and thought has gone into it, much more. I had 4 questions on the IRP and don't need to be answered tonight since you've laid out a cadence of presentations on different topics. But I'd like to tee up the questions and you can answer what you'd like tonight and the others as we get into the specific topics. And I can send you the questions as well if you would like, and that's kosher under Brown Act and everything. But they're public. The first is, in discussing the WAPA contract, the stated decision is whether to renew the city's hydroelectric contract, which expires at the end of 2024, or replace it with other carbon-free resources. So I guess the first part of the question is, why would we not renew it? Since, and by the way, I appreciated the extra chart making it SCAP. I think that's really important in thinking about this. But first of all, why would we not renew it, since hydro is usually the gold standard, both renewable and dispatchable? And the second part, what does, quote, other carbon-free resources mean? What are some examples of that? Especially, can carbon-free resources mean renewable energy certificates or offsets, which of course are financial instruments and not energy resources at all. Second question is, the plan says the IRP will address Palo Alto's long-term load forecast, giving consideration to the city's electrification efforts and aggressive climate and sustainability goals, but it also says it's not intended for developing new initiatives to meet the city's SCAP objectives. So I guess the question is, how is it possible to give particular consideration to the city's climate and sustainability goals without addressing SCAP, which of course is the city's plan for how it will achieve those goals? And the second part, if this is not how we address SCAP, we meaning CPAU, how do we address it? Since it's the plan of record for the city. The third question, in discussing COTP, the IRP says the city will owe a large payment. And I'm assuming, at some point you'll talk about, how large the payment is and, specifically what it's for. And also, especially if we opt in, what would be our ongoing costs? What would be our ongoing benefit? And also in technical dimension, what is the power at the end of COTP? Is it hydro? Is it, some other, it isn't stated at all what kind of power it is. And that's obviously really important in terms of our RPS and, sustainability objectives. Fourth question on page 39, and the pages I'm referring to are the packet page numbers. And elsewhere in the IRP section, in the AMI discussion, it references distributed energy resources, DER. Obviously this is a very challenging, dynamic, fast-changing topic, but I really appreciate some depth on your current thinking on the impact and nature of DER over the term of the IRP and beyond. Because, we spend a lot of time in these meetings, talking about problems that are due to distribution resources that the city put in place, even 50 or more years ago. So, thinking through in the dynamic environment we have today with EVs and probably bi-directional EVs within a few years and photovoltaics on residences and storage and all that, seems like DER becomes much more complex and potentially important source of generation that it has been in the past. So those are my 4 questions that I would hope we would address as this moves along. And I'd be happy to send you an email with them if needed.
Okay, and so you don't want them addressed here. We'll just move on. What is?
Yeah, sure. I think it's up to Jim and Lena, Lena, in terms of whether they'd like to or not, or just address these as they move into each topic, since we've calendared, discussions on these topics in the future.
I mean, we could possibly address some of them very briefly, since this is, an educational exercise, for some of the folks here. If that's okay with the chair, Siegel. Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. So, your first question is why would we not do WAPA, and what does other resources mean? So for the WAPA question, it comes down to portfolio fit, how the resource is changing over time, with the drying of the West and the generation profile with our current portfolio, and then the costs, as well as any other aspects that the community feels like are important. And then I'll just go right into the load forecast part of that, and I'll let Jim outline the requirements on the what other resources could be. To your second question on how this is not a vehicle to put forth new initiatives for the SCAP, what that is essentially trying to state is that the council actions on SCAP are going to have primacy over this, and whatever, and that the load forecast will be used as an input in this process, based on an estimated uptake of programs that we see deploying and the uptake on those programs. So we would not want to base our 30-year procurement decisions on anything that didn't, on any programs that were not slated to be deployed and didn't have sufficient support in the community or financial support to be deployed. And so that it will be an estimate of things going forward, and we will have time to adjust with additional resources or perhaps layoffs as the SCAP evolves. And then COTP, just as an educational part, it can deliver anything. It's just transmission. And so there is, wind in the Northwest and hydro in the Northwest that, could be attractive options, but that's why it's not outlined. And Jim, I guess I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. And in terms of the resources that we're going to be looking for in the RFP, we're only looking for physical energy that can be delivered to California. So we're not going to consider any offers for REC only transactions or for carbon offsets. I anticipate we'll receive a lot of offers for solar, probably some wind, geothermal, maybe some hydro or biomass, storage with some of those, maybe a significant number of those. But those are the kinds of resources we're going to be considering.
Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate the quick feedback on those couple of parts of the topic.
Commissioner Bowie, I believe. Or maybe it was I forgot. I'm sorry.
I think you said Commissioner Forcell.
Okay, Commissioner Forcell, thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, a few comments, just harkening back to the purpose, get UAC feedback on the proposed work plan, including future discussion items and timeline. So I guess, yeah, one of the things I would love to see in a future discussion is really taking a closer look at the effect of drought on the Western contract. The packet page 58, slide 10, talks about the capacity and cost and allocation, but it looks like 360 gigawatt hours in an average year. And I think I'm very interested to know what is it on a drought year? To state the obvious, in the last 10 years, we've had what, 7, 8 drought years? And I don't know how an average year is defined and if it's taking drought into account, but it does certainly feel like any future planning should assume that the dry West is the new normal. And then the other question I have is the contract cost of 12 million, is that what it would be going forward? Or is that what it has cost in the rearview mirror?
Yeah, so we have projections from WAPA for the cost going forward, but that's what it has been, in the recent past, and it's stayed relatively flat and escalated slowly. Just to answer that, but yeah, so it will include, it'll have to include a variety of cost scenarios as well as generation scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, just to state the obvious, and I think Commissioner Metz was getting at this, looking at the cost of alternatives and trying to get a realistic assessment of the cost of the WAPA resource. Let's see, my question about the COTP, packet page 60, slide 12, mentions that due to low utilization, Palo Alto laid off its share. Was that low utilization by Palo Alto or low utilization in general?
Yeah, that was low utilization in general. And, with the retirement of in-state natural gas, imports are a bigger part of California's supply plan. So transmission is getting higher utilization these days.
Okay, that then helps explain packet page 62, slide 14, just the options listed, use it ourselves. And I was wondering, how would we use it ourselves if we haven't in the past? Does that mean, do we use it ourselves only if we've procured a resource that would need to use that line to transmit? Or does it mean using it ourselves like as a market option and we sell transmission on the whatever day ahead, hourly, something? Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, and so we could do either, in terms of using it ourselves for a designated resource, or we can enter it into an options construct where we're essentially collecting congestion rents on that transmission asset, or schedule it in the day ahead. Yeah, and so there are a number of options there. I think it's still a less congested area than Southern California. in general. So that means it's lower value than transmission, down south to the larger loads, but it's, yeah.
So whether we negotiate a new layoff or do some kind of market thing, it's lower value. Whereas if we use it ourselves, then it's, well, I'll leave that to another time and perhaps the consultant. But I did want to clarify, letting CAISO use it, that would just be give it away?
No, that would be with the CRR options. And so we'd collect congestion rents with that. Yeah. Letting them use it for a price.
Gotcha. That's, if I'd have known to use that language, that's what I was trying to get at. Excellent. And then let's see, on the timeline, my question was, this is packet page 65, slide number 17. This all looks well and good. My question is, which of these would be action items for the UAC to potentially recommend something specific to council as opposed to continued discussion?
Jim, do you want to take that question?
Sure. Let me share my screen again. I think in terms of what would be an action item, probably none of the first three. Probably we might have an action related to the optimization results in terms of a recommendation for moving forward with a contract that we receive, an offer we received from the RFP that we're doing right now. And then we'll certainly need an action item on approving the final IRP and possibly on the preliminary version as well, the draft version.
And would the final IRP in November 2023, would that include a decision about the WAPA contract, which isn't technically due till the following June? I mean, I'm not giving negative feedback on that. It's 6 months, seems like cutting it plenty fine. I was just curious.
I'd say it could include that final recommendation, but it doesn't, as you said, it doesn't need to. We could allow ourselves more time if we needed to do some additional work to figure that out.
Got it. Thank you. That was it for me.
Thank you, Commissioner Forcell. Commissioner Bowie.
Yes, so admittedly, I'm wrapping my head around the process and work plan here, and sort of at the highest level trying to understand why we're putting the two contracts in the work plan before the load forecast scenario, in that it seems like the outcomes of load forecast will somewhat determine the approach and the value of the two contracts to the city of Palo Alto. It may not impact their market rates outside of the city, but in terms of whether we would choose to use those resources in part or in whole, it seems like the load forecast would fit into those. So that's kind of my first question is, what's the underlying thinking of having those two in the work plan before the load forecast?
Yeah, we're in the forecast or the work plan where we talk about COTP and Western discussion. That's intended to be kind of a deeper dive into these topics, not the final say on them. So I think the final say will likely be part of the discussion around the other options, the optimization results, in the early part of next year. So we will have more times to discuss, Western and COTP before or after that November discussion.
Okay, and I still think there may be some merit, like seeing the one graph that included the load forecast, removing WAPA from it, that was pretty telling of where this fits into the profile and how we would use it. So it might be one suggestion where I'm kind of curious about the load forecasting in terms of those two things, unless that work plan discussion is really just focusing on the nature of these two resources and possibilities of how we can either renew the contracts or reduce, or how, what it looks like with the layoffs going forward. Is there partial shares, things of that sort? So that might just be me trying to wrap my head around some of these details as we get into it. The next question on sort of load forecasting, we're talking about it in the realm of the SCAP implementation and goals. We've also been having lots of conversations over the past months about sort of the actual implementation and some of the issues that we're looking at, just permitting and staffing and the sort of where the rubber meets the road of implementing electrification in Palo Alto. Will that be something, will that be its own scenario to think about, not just the goals that we've set out, but a process of getting from here to there, of what it looks like to kind of staff and build and meet those goals?
Lena, do you want to take that, or do you want to take that to Jonathan?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll take it first again, and I agree with you where the rubber meets the road is, where we're making financial commitments on behalf of all the customers in the city. And so we have to do that based on our best estimate of where the rubber meets the road. Sorry, I don't know which camera to look at. And the back of my head is really awesome too. But this is not going to be based on goals. This is going to be based on committed actions and what we're actually seeing in the load forecast, to date, with some best estimates on how that's going to continue. Yeah.
Okay, and then a final question, and Commissioner Forcell may have touched on this a little, but how we've included a hydro rate adjuster now, and that seems to be part of the discussion around the WAPA contract. Is that part of it that we should be considering here? What hydro rate adjusters look like going into the future, the availability of the resource? How does that impact the overall value of that resource? And maybe crossing too many concepts here.
I think in terms of what customers are paying in dry periods, that factors into the resource attractiveness. I will also just say that, part of the discussions around the resource will be valuing it relative to the market itself. And then we'll, relative to our portfolio and relative to the market, our existing portfolio, so that we can compare it to other resources. So that's part of the reason for having earlier discussions relative to the load forecast. But hydro rate adjuster and the impact to the value of the resource. Jim, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I would say that the fact that we have a portfolio that is so heavily concentrated in hydro makes it really crucial that we have a rate adjuster, a hydro rate adjuster. So if as we go through this decision-making process, if we decide to reduce our share of Western, that would make it less crucial for us to have the rate adjuster. We would invoke it less often. We could have a smaller adjuster. But yeah, that I guess is something that we should probably take into account in this part of the decision, the impact on our rates from having a resource that's so sensitive to drought conditions versus one that's more predictable year over year. That's a good point.
That's it for me. Thank you, Drs. Perkins and Stack.
Any other commissioner comments? I did want to note that Commissioner Scharf had to leave the meeting. Commissioner Forcell, I think I saw you raise your hand again.
Yeah, thank you. I had just one more quick thing to say. I realized that in the report, it's noted that in the, packet page 39, it's a summary of the 2018 IRP work plan initiatives, and we haven't talked much about evaluating the merits of rebalancing the electric supply portfolio to lower its seasonal and daily market price exposure by more closely balancing long-term supplies with its hourly and monthly electric loads. I just want to make note, I'm interested in that, and I hope that it would be part of future discussions. It looks like it is ongoing and will be part of the next IRP. It's fine, we don't have to talk about it now, but I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there that matches our sustainability goals and grid health goals and so forth. That's all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would just say that we didn't really have an opportunity to rebalance the portfolio in the past 5 years because we didn't have any contracts ending like we do now with Western. So this is our opportunity to look at, rebalancing and shifting away from, resources like hydro that produce so much in the spring and not as much in the fall and winter.
Any other commissioner comments? I just had a couple, if I recall correctly from the last time we were talking about the Western contract, there was a priority grid scale, however you want to, a list of priorities of how that resource is used, and hydro was not at the top, as I recall. There's recreational, and I can't remember the other uses. And I don't know if, I'm just curious, and maybe when we're digging deeper into the contract is the time to really talk about it, but whether that has shifted or could shift over time, or will we still have the priority that we have today?
Yeah, that's enshrined in the Central Valley project itself, so it can't be changed. And so yeah, hydropower is not the primary purpose of the projects. And I think, what we're also seeing is with climate change endangering more and more fish that from temperatures that, in order to operate the federal project in accordance with the Endangered Species Act, that you will see more and more bypasses. To lower temperatures and maintain downstream temperatures, to try to increase the survival rates of those fish. This year there's not going to be much bypassing because there isn't sufficient water, and the water that's there is already warm. So, interesting things happen.
So, okay, so I guess that would be part of the projection when we get down into the weeds. So that would be interesting. And I just wanted to make sure that it's still the case that large hydro is not considered a renewable in California. That's still the case. Okay.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And then my final question has to do with flexibility with both of these contracts. Was, I think you said that the Western, it's sort of a 5-year commitment and we get to reconsider it every 5 years. So while it is a long-term contract, it's not really in terms of our opportunities to reevaluate. And similarly with COTP, since I assume there's always the opportunity to do layoffs if the market is amenable to that. So again, it's not sort of a all or nothing commitment on the front end. Is that right?
Right, correct. So yeah, first to Western, yes, we have the opportunity to reconsider every 5 years. Those 5-year off ramps were a really crucial negotiated addition to only this contract out of like the nationwide organization of WAPA. So it's a commitment with the opportunity to take an off ramp every 5 years, which is you can't get it back once you give it up. So it's not an opportunity to re-up for your whole share that you used to have. It's an opportunity to decrease or exit every 5 years. And then for COTB, yes, there are a lot of parts changing on the transmission side of the picture right now with the expanded day ahead market, which is, could increase the value of COTP or could increase it a lot, could increase it a little, maybe keep it about the same, potentially decrease it. And so when you initiate a layoff, when the resources, it might be worth looking at initiating a layoff after the EDAM goes live in 2024, because we might get a better deal for that. resource, but there are a lot of ifs with that statement, and most of them are not under our control. So, but we are, we're working with some of the smartest heads in the room on that one, and some of the folks that are helping the CAISO board of directors design the EDM in an equitable way for CAISO customers. So our crystal ball is as good as anybody's.
Excellent. And okay, Councilmember Cormac, I see you waving.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chair Siegel. I love our combination of high tech and low tech. I think this particular item is setting a new record for 3-letter acronyms, although some are 4. So if anybody's watching from home, good luck following along. Anyway, just respect with the work plan. One thing that you might want to contemplate, I'm not advocating for this, but given the complexity and importance of this, it might be worth having a study session with council partway through. It could even be a joint session with the UAC. Just something to think about, because the breadth of things the council covers is so large, and this was such an important decision all these many years ago, and really set the stage for us to be able to do things. So I just offer that as a something to contemplate. And then just connecting with the SCAP, we're going to be having a workshop in October, an in-person workshop in October for people to come and talk and learn more about how to make better choices in their homes. And one consistent question is, where does our electricity come from? And while we have the answer today, it's possible we can have a table that we'll have to call it something more exciting than IRP, but the future of electricity, for Palo Alto, something like that. That would be another opportunity to get some public input. And if you did a study session, then usually there's some press on that and people who are attending, slightly larger audience for council sessions than there is for the UAC. So I'm not suggesting you add anything to your work plan, which is already quite comprehensive. I'm just thinking about how to get to, a little bit more community engagement, and make sure that, the council is fully aware of the magnitude of the decision that they'll need to make. Thanks.
Thanks. That reminded me of one other thought I had, which was also in terms of engaging the community. And there's this upcoming electric vehicle community opportunity, and there's the come see what the utility does event. And I think that the EV events happen periodically. And I don't know if there's some kind of sheet that could have, maybe see what's going on with electricity, or where does your electricity come from, with a URL, and maybe some way to start engaging the community and get them thinking about it. Those might be opportunities to do that as well. Okay, I don't see any other hands. I was going to take a quick break now. I don't know, do you want to just plow through the last item? Sorry about that. Or take a quick break. You guys okay plowing through? You're gonna sort of nod. Okay, why don't we just do it? Okay, so thank you. We will turn to item 5, a discussion of AMI opt-out and electric metering remote disconnects. Do we have any community comments?
Chair, there are no hands raised on Zoom or in the room.
Thank you. Is there going to be a presentation on this?
Yes, there will be a presentation. But before I begin, I want to introduce Rui Silva. He's the newly promoted AMI manager. He's been with the city, I want to say, over 19 years. He is.
Oh yeah, congratulations.
His experience and lots of experience in the operations, water, gas, wastewater. He's our OQ operator for gas operations. He's our business analyst who does dashboards, performance reporting. He's also our AV guy for all hands meetings. So he does it all. So I'm very glad he's in this position helping us out. So thanks, Rui.
Thank you.
All right, let me put this on now. No pressure. Sorry. All right, so tonight we're presenting two AMI-related draft policies for your consideration. One is the customer opt-out policy, and the second one is the remote disconnect reconnect policy. Tonight, we are trying to gather your input for both these policies as a discussion item. The plan is to bring them back to you in August for approval. So we'd like to get your feedback and hopefully incorporate some of those changes in there. And then we will eventually incorporate these into our rules and regulations as well. And the plan is also to bring them back to the policy committee and council for approval before they take into effect. So with that, I'll start with the customer opt-out policy. As we've heard from the UAC and council, we do want to offer our customers an option to opt out of this advanced metering program if they choose to. Based on national statistics, about 0.5% of customers usually opt out. So for Palo Alto's customer account, it's about 150 customers. Hopefully that number and percentage of opt-outs will be much lower here. So we do encourage all customers to adopt this advanced meter so they can reap some of the benefits, such as interval and daily consumption data. They'll also have water leak alerts, and they'll also be able to forecast a high utility bill. So those are some of the benefits. So there's two ways of opting out. So if the first one is if you can notify us right away. So we're already keeping track of a list of customers who wishes to opt out. They can contact customer service. So before the meter is replaced, they just notify us, fill out the form, and agree to the self-read option, I guess. And then the second option is if the meter's already been installed, we will allow them to opt out, but the only caveat is we're not going to put back in the legacy meter. We're going to turn off instead, we'll just turn off the communication transmitter inside the AMI meter. So there won't be anything transmitting, and we will still have to go out there and read the meters every month, or the customer will have to read it every month. So it'll act like basically a mechanical meter. And then finally, all legacy meters will eventually be upgraded to AMI because we may not have inventory of all these meters going forward. And some of the situations where they will be converted to an AMI meter without the radio transmitter is if there's a meter failure, but we don't have anything in inventory, meter maintenance obsolescence, there's something wrong with the meters we find out, or the customer decides to upgrade their meter. Customers who are eligible to opt out, we are recommending that they participate in the customer read program, just because with this AMI deployment, we will be eliminating most, if not all, of the meter readers. So we don't have staff really to help read these. Right now, I think we have about, I want to say, probably about 450 customers who are already doing the self-read program. So all you have to do is take a picture of your meter. If you know how to read it, you just send us an email of the meter read that's on your dials. So either way, and we can convert it into the billing system. So then it's also part of the opt-out program. The customers must give us access to their meter at least once a year, so we can do a physical inspection of the read to make sure it's correct, just to validate it. And then the opt-out must also be at the account level. So if there's an ADU in the premise, it depends on who the owner is. If it's the ADU is associated to the home account, then the homeowner has to opt out for both. If the ADU is a separate account, then the ADU unit can opt out on their own. So it depends on how the ADU is set up in the billing system. Customers who aren't eligible to opt out, there are some of the reasons here: equipment tampering, historical, not in good standing accounts. Again, meters that are inaccessible or hazardous for meter readers or anyone to go read the meter. So, and then for the opt-out fee, these are based on estimates that we have based on staff tasks, activities. So one thing we'll have to do is create a new meter read or billing account and move all the customers who opt out to this new account. Then we'll also have to verify eligibility as we receive these applications. And then we also have to go through the reassignment of accounts to the new meter route. And for ongoing It does, and then I think for the setup, I think we estimated it takes about 60 minutes of all staff's time to do the reassignment. And for the monthly fees, it takes about 20-25 minutes every month for us to take down the meter read from the email or photo, and then do some validation, reviewing the historical consumption, and then processing the billing itself. And there is discussion that we are also considering putting in a low income. Oh, sorry, yeah, the charges right here, right? I think. Yeah, so sorry. The charges that we're proposing tonight is $100 for a setup one-time fee. And for the monthly fee, it's $25, which is kind of our cost recovery based on the hours and minutes we estimated for each activity. And then we are going to be proposing a low income program. We didn't have it in this submittal, but we will have it in the next version of it. So I think the thought is for the setup fee for the low income will be about $25 and the monthly fee will be $10. Should I pause here before we go to the next policy?
Could you just say the low income numbers again,
Sure.
since they're not already written down?
Yeah, it's 50 for setup instead of 100, and then $10 instead of 25 for monthly. And then customers can opt back in at any time and we will discontinue these charges. So should I pause or keep going? The other one's a shorter policy. The electric remote connect disconnect policy. What do you guys think?
Does anyone have any, do any commissioners have any questions on the opt-out policy or fees before we move on? Okay.
Commissioner Forcell.
Chair Siegel, could I ask you a couple questions?
Please.
I'm just curious, is this opt-out policy just for residential customers or can commercial customers also opt out?
It's only for residential customers.
Are commercial customers already on some kind of smart meters?
Yes, some of them are AMR meters already. So they're already electronic meters. So they're one way instead of two-way transmitting.
I see. But in any case, they're not going to have an opt-out option.
No, we're not offering.
And then I'm just curious if you have any insights for those customers who already do a customer read their own meter program. What are some of the reasons why customers choose to do that?
It's usually they're in the backyards or they have a dog or something and when it's inaccessible, they don't want to open their gate. So generally that's the reason.
That was it for me. Just two quick questions.
Thanks. Any other questions? Okay, I think you can. Oh,
Mr.
I'm sorry.
Johnston,
Yeah,
Vice Chair.
yeah. It's easy. I can't see them all when it's screen share, so feel free to call them out.
Okay. Chair Siegel, could I ask a question since we've stopped?
Yes, please. And after you, I see that Commissioner Metz also has a question.
Okay. So first of all, just a comment, I do think it's important to have a lower set of fees for low-income people. I think that's important to do and is fair. And I just want to confirm what I think I heard you say, which is that the fee levels that you have proposed, $100 and $25, that's based on our best estimate of the cost to have staff perform those functions.
That is correct.
Okay. Again, I think it's important that we base it on cost. We saw a comment from an email that we got that PG&E has a proposal where their fees would be quite a bit less. If we're going to be charging more, I think we need to be able to justify that based on our costs. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Metz.
Yeah, I think that you answered my question, but I just want to make sure. What I was wondering about is time, if we do go to a time of day rate for residential, how we would implement that. But it sounds like it's the same meter. You've just turned off the radio communications, so we would be able to deal with that, right?
Yeah, for time of use rates, I don't think the opt-out customers will be eligible for that program because they won't have that interval data. And we won't be receiving either to bill for it.
Oh, that's true. Although you could just sum it up and they would report 2 meters or something like that. It's possible. Okay, anyway, I think I know. So you're saying basically they would not be eligible for time of use. So what would happen if we want to impose time of use rates?
I don't know if we would ever impose. I think we would offer it and then hopefully persuade. But I don't think everyone would go on time of use. I don't think it's capable, depending on meter.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any other commissioner thoughts? We can move on. I would just sort of underscore what Vice Chair Johnson said, both in terms of justifying the cost and having the lower.
And Commissioner Bowie has a question.
Oh, sorry. Great. Thanks.
Yes, sorry about that. I didn't want to jump in. Just to follow up on Commissioner Metz's question, though, that if there is a time of use rate that is in place, it seems as though there's going to have to be some kind of calculation or balancing so that the opt-out doesn't become an incentive to avoid a time of use rate. I think that was maybe Commissioner Metz's implication there, was that this could potentially be cheaper than a time of use rate for a customer, that they might be opting out because they're trying to avoid other rates. So that's my only question of like how we align rate structure, not incentivize read your own meter versus AMI.
Yes, that's a good question. We will definitely take that into account when we design those time of use rates. Okay, with no other questions, I'm going to move to the next policy, which is the electric meter remote disconnect and reconnect policy. So with these devices, we're going to be able to actually turn off a meter remotely. So we don't have to be physically present at the premise for these electric meters. We're going to propose piloting about 500 of these meters. Then the conditions that has here as guidelines, these are kind of like strategic locations. We're going to look for premises that have high move in and move out rates or high turnover. Any address that's been disconnected for non-payment or other reasons in the past 12 months. And then also sites where there are meters as deemed inaccessible or hazardous to city staff. So these are kind of the locations we're targeting. Again, we're only doing about 500 of them right now just to pilot it. Unlike other cities, which may have a higher number of these remote disconnect switches, I don't think we have the non-payment problem in this city, fortunately. And also, we don't have big college. We do have big college time, but they have their own facilities where they live. And then for this connection, basically, if someone moves out or there's an outstanding bill, there's no agreed payment solution or plan, or if it's a hazardous condition, then we will have the right to remotely disconnect that customer. And then the customer will be responsible for any impacts. But of course, we will notify them in advance before we do any kind of these remote connection or disconnection. And for reconnection, again, if they establish a new account or they made payment or may set up a plan, then we can automatically again re-energize them or reconnect their meter. So this is better than the past where you actually have to call in someone, maybe wait a day or two and schedule an appointment. So now people will have exact time and day of when they'll get their reconnection without us actually rolling out a vehicle. So that's a huge benefit as well. And then also on the end of this part is the customer will be responsible for all the equipment and appliances that is at the premise. Again, they will sign a waiver and everything else before we push that button. And that is it. If you have any questions on this policy, please let me know.
Any commissioner questions? Oh, I thought I saw.
Commissioner Purcell?
Chair, can I ask a quick question?
Sure, and then Vice Chair Johnson, I see your hand up after.
So I just wanted to clarify and make sure I understood. When you talk about the installation, packet page 97, this is just the priority of which locations will get an AMI meter first. It's not like some smart meters have remote disconnect and others will not have it. Does that question make sense? Like once AMI is deployed fully throughout the city, any customer can be remotely disconnected. It's not like only some can be remotely disconnected.
Only some. We're ordering 500
Oh.
of those devices. They are embedded with the meter.
So then when there's additional deployment of AMI, lots of customers will have a smart meter that does not have remote disconnect capability.
That's correct.
And is that because that equipment is more expensive?
It is more expensive, but we also heard about concerns about cyber attacks or whatnot. So I think we want to test out the technology. We want to
Okay,
experiment at least first before we make it a full scale deployment.
okay.
So
So then, all right, so this initial pilot program is 500 meters. Did I hear that correctly?
that's correct.
And you just said we don't really have locations with a lot of move in and move out, and we don't have a lot of non-payment.
We do have some locations identified with the move-ins and move-outs, and also the inaccessible ones as well. We don't have a lot of non-payments, thankfully, but we
But
do
you've
have-
identified 500 customers that are sort of fit these criteria and,
Yes,
okay. Got it. And then, to state the obvious, this is just for electricity, not for gas.
correct.
And can you speak to what are some potential hazards that the customer will be signing a waiver that they are responsible for? Like, what are some things that a customer could potentially
Sure.
trip up on?
It's like leaving a pizza box on the stove and not turning off the stove, leaving your hair dryer on or your curler on and forgetting to turn it off before we reconnect, I guess. Just leaving appliances on is the biggest concern.
Thanks. That was it for me.
Thanks. Vice Chair Johnston. Oh, could you hear me? You're on mute.
Sorry, I got confused here. I understand we don't have a lot of accounts where we have to disconnect them for non-payment, but I assume on those that we do, we give those customers plenty of warning and plenty of opportunity to bring their account current before we cut them off.
That's correct. We do give them at least 3 or 4 notices. We email them, we call them in addition to those notices. So we give them lots of opportunities to at least set up.
And that policy wouldn't change with this remote disconnect.
That's correct.
Okay, I mean, because I'd be very concerned if that we were able to use this remote disconnect, if somebody misses a payment by a week or two.
I guess they will get one additional notice when we do the remote disconnect, but it won't be less than what they're getting. It'll be +1.
Okay, they'd get an additional notice to say, we're about to disconnect you.
Right.
Okay. All right, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Bowie, is your hand up?
Yes, just kind of curious on the wider rollout to this. How many, is this cost effective compared to doing an in-person disconnect? Are we really doing that many disconnects that this would be like a entire system-wide deployment, that this would be a cost-effective measure?
I think it is definitely cost effective. It's just that we haven't found then the number based on our numbers, there isn't a lot of these opportunities. Like a device for the disconnect is like $30, $35, I think, or so. And then to roll a truck out, it's usually we charge about $120 an hour. So we will be saving 2 truck rolls by using these remote disconnect switches and connect switches. But just that when we analyze the number of, like, say, move-ins and move-outs and also inaccessible meters, there weren't as many. So we didn't think it was warranted to spend that money as of right now. But
if I could add real quick, Commissioner Bowie. So, the idea is that not everybody's going to get one of these disconnects. As Dave mentioned, it's going to be like some of the businesses that are like down at the Stanford Mall, where you have to enter multiple doors to try to get access. You have to get a security guard to get access to those places. And the biggest piece that where we see these disconnects would be helpful is the college students. College students move in, college students move back out. Every time we have to roll a truck, it's costing us somewhere probably right around $150 to $200 on a truck roll. So the idea is not to put these disconnects in every residential home. I think that again, the idea was mostly limited to access issues, lots of turnover in apartment complexes.
For those of you who are listening and not watching, that was Director Dean Batchelor.
Sorry, I guess I should have introduced myself. Sorry.
Right, thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That this is aimed at a narrower kind of section rather than a full deployment.
Any other commissioner questions? I just had two thoughts. One is on the disconnect. We haven't talked about the benefit of customer service in terms of reconnects being faster. And actually, I think that's a great consequence of the device. And then on the cybersecurity, I guess I just throw out this thought that if that is a concern, that I hope that we will actually test the security and not just wait and see whether there is an event, but actually actively try to hack our own systems and see how easy it is and see what we can do to make it safer before we roll out further, if that's what we decide to do.
Yes, we can do that. We'll try.
Yeah. Great. Any other last questions?
If I may quickly.
Yeah.
Just given that it's a discussion item and you're looking for feedback, I just wanted to give positive feedback for both policies, and especially with the added lower fee schedule for low income for the customer opt-out.
Great, thank you. Is there any other feedback or any changes you guys would like to see made before we bring it back in August? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's very clear policies. Okay. We're done with the agenda items or the discussion and action items, and now we can move on to commissioner comments and reports from meetings or events. Any commissioner comments? Okay. Commissioner Metz, were you trying? You're on mute. I don't know if you're trying to say something.
No, I was in New Jersey, but that probably doesn't count.
Hope it was a good trip. Okay. And then do we have any future topics for upcoming meetings? Vice Chair Johnson.
So I think that we're working with a consultant to get us started on this kind of the grid modernization project. And I think it would be useful either in August or September to get an update on where that process stands.
Okay. So an update on the consultant, where they are.
Noted.
And Commissioner Metz.
Yeah, there were a couple of topics I was wondering about because the rolling calendar ends really in August, which are SCAP, when we get back into SCAP, the FTTH strategy, and also what I don't see on here at all, but seems important based on the discussion we just had on the operations plan is DER. Is there going to be discussion on distributed energy resources?
When you say DER, do you mean tied to anything like load or supply, or just in the just sort of on its own?
Well,
or SCAP or whatever.
I guess sort of all the above. I mean, it is an input. The way we sort of left the discussion of the IRP was, I think there were thoughts that maybe we should have our act together in terms of loads, right? But DER can be both a source of energy and also a sink, right? It can be both a load. So if we believe that, say, over 10, 20 years, that's going to be a big thing, it seems like it's at the root of a lot of the big decisions we're making now. And also, if we believe it's going to be significantly different in the future than it is has been in the past, which I think probably is true, then it becomes kind of a big deal. Particularly, we're thinking about, these hydro contracts, and maybe if there's drought, and maybe they're not as good an idea as they were in the past. Then what takes the place of that? So it seems like everything keeps coming back to DER. And so, it seems like that's an important topic.
Okay, I was just trying to get whether you want sort of a discussion about DER or tied to some other discussion.
Yeah, I think, to me, at least personally, I'd be interested in sort of technically, what are some scenarios for what could be, and then how does that affect our plans and, everything else that we've talked about.
Thanks. Any other? And I think maybe it makes sense just as an informational item to put down how many open positions and how many, you had that chart, it was how many unfilled positions, how many had left, and how many were sort of in process. That might be nice just to see quarterly or something.
Yeah. Maybe we can give you a quarterly update on those if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yes, Commissioner Forcell.
Thank you. Two quick questions. One is the quarterly reports. Are they quarterly, or are we getting like a piece of a quarterly report every month now?
I think we split it up into 2 quarterly reports. One is the financial side and one's on the program side. I think
Okay.
you just received the financial one, and then you should be getting the program one maybe next month or in August.
Thank you for clarifying. So the items that are listed in quarterly reports, the EV charger installation and bucket 1 rec sales, that'll be the next quarterly. That's perfect. My other question, I was just glancing on the city council side of the forecast rolling calendar. And there's one interesting item, which, well, many of them are interesting, but especially develop a plan for implementing a one water portfolio. Is that, I don't know what that C designation means. Is that like a proposal to hire a consultant or something? Or is that a substantive discussion of one water?
It's I'm not looking at the chart, but it's a consulting contract and it goes on consent to council.
So the UAC, when that consultant has done some work and there's some interesting stuff to talk about, it'll come to the UAC.
Absolutely.
One water stuff. Awesome. Thank you.
Any other commissioner feedback? Great. We're off in July, so the next meeting is August 3rd. And if there's nothing else, if someone wants to move to end the meeting, adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Second.
And happy summer, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Then.